Welcome to the Motor City Mama Show. I'm your host, Kara, and today we're bringing you a powerful and deeply personal conversation with someone whose courage is reshaping how we talk about domestic abuse. Nicole Beverly is a survivor of extreme domestic violence, a fierce advocate, and the founder of a support network for others facing similar battles. Her story is not just one of survival, it's one of strength, advocacy, and transformation. Welcome to the show, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming in. So, tell me a little bit about your background and what led you to speak about your experience about domestic abuse.
I am a clinical social worker by profession. I've been working with the Washtenaw Intermediate School District for the past 12 years, and I'm a behavior consultant for schools all over the county. A lot of the students that we work with are having behavioral issues, and what we found is a lot of it is directly related to trauma.
And your story is unique. You just had your story is in the movies now, and you've written a book. So tell me a little bit about your history with domestic abuse itself.
I am a survivor of domestic violence, stalking, and multiple attempts by my ex-husband to hire inmates to kill me from several different correctional facilities in the state of Michigan. When I first left my abuser, it took me a long time to talk about the abuse and the fact that I had gone through it, but also the legal system let me down. For about 2.5 years, I was being actively stalked by my ex-husband, calling the police countless times, countless personal protection violations that resulted in hand slaps and warnings, until, finally I met a police officer in Washtenaw County who took me seriously and started really looking into what was actually happening and stepped up and started following through with what was happening with my ex-husband to protect myself and my children.
Was that Officer Griffin by any chance?
So his name in real life is Officer Paul Corey, and he was Officer Griffin in the movie, played by Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I told him I interviewed Marcus Woods and Tandrika last week, and we discussed that. And I told him, I said, "You're my hero in the movie, and the real officer is my hero. It should be anyone's hero. If you see domestic, you should speak out, whether you're a police officer or not. You should speak out. You should be a voice for that victim because maybe no one else is a voice for them."
Yeah, and he, unfortunately, so many of the times I called 911, I got disrespect from officers. Like, there's no other way to put it. Why am I calling? What did I do? I was actually asked that by an officer. Like, well, what did you do? Also, even though, like, having evidence of video and voice recordings, was told it wasn't a serious enough situation for them to do anything. And after a while, in the beginning, I stopped calling the police, even though I had a personal protection order, because nothing was happening. And that's reflected in the movie, where they show me going to the police station and being told to yet again, document, and just the frustration that I was feeling of no one ever helping me. And so I'm so thankful for Officer Corey for actually listening, and he now does trainings for both the military and police on how to handle domestic violence calls, and he uses my episode of Inside Evil with Chris Como to illustrate how easily things can be missed. And now he'll probably use the movie itself when he's doing those trainings.
Right. Well, I mean, it's hard for anyone to see domestic violence because the abuse survivors, it's hard for them to open up to anybody because, like in your situation, no one wants to believe you. They don't want to listen. They don't know what to do. So what are some of the early red flags for someone to look for when you're choosing a partner? It's all beautiful and they're going to be on their best behavior, but over time, those red flags started to show up. So what were some of his?
Yeah, so looking back now, knowing them, they were all there, and they were there pretty early on in my relationship, and they were pretty classic. So from the beginning, rushing into a relationship, which that is a really confusing one. Love bombing, only wanting to be in a relationship with you. They love you so much, which is confusing, especially for younger people. And I was 18 when I met my abuser, so I fell right into that because it feels good and you
Mhm.
think that's what it should be. But the very quick rushing into a relationship is one. Put downs was another one that was pretty early on, but it was in the beginning. It was, oh, I'm just kidding.
Mhm.
But I call that planting seeds of doubt,
To see how
because
you would react
to
to it,
see
see
how
if
I would
you would.
react, and
Right.
also like even though he was joking, it still made me wonder if he felt that
Mhm.
way about those things. And then it went from joking to actual put downs, like
Mhm.
you're stupid, no one cares what you think, no one cares about your opinion. Isolation from family and friends. My friends were a bad influence in college. He didn't think I should hang out with them. So there was that isolation piece for sure. And then the controlling behavior
Mhm.
of what I could do, what I could wear, who I could talk to was there fairly early on. And then anger. So I always tell people when you're dating someone, pay attention to how they treat other people, even when you're out in the community or out to dinner. If someone bumps into them, if the waiter gets their order wrong, are there extreme reactions of anger? Because
Mhm.
now, in hindsight, looking back, I saw those.
Mhm.
And there was always an explanation, an excuse for why those things happened. But looking back, they were probably almost all there within the first year of dating him.
So when you first started, I mean, they're in love with you. They give you all this time and attention, and you're the best thing in the world. How soon after that ended did you actually feel his physical pain, that he actually laid a hand on you? Because sometimes it's within the first few years. Sometimes it takes 10, 15
Yeah.
years before they show their true self.
Yeah, so that's a great question that you asked that because in my situation in particular, it was a slow progression. Like the emotional abuse and verbal abuse was there pretty much from the beginning, but the physical abuse was a slower escalation. And it would start with maybe throwing something in my direction, but not making contact with me, or like a balled up fist, but not actually hitting me. I would say like the first instances of actual pushing, shoving was probably in year 2 or 3, um, followed by apologies and promises to change and it's never going to happen again. But then at the end of our relationship is when the physical violence really escalated to the punching, choking, kicking. And I do want to, when we're talking about choking or strangulation, that is the number one predictor for homicide for victims of domestic violence, is if your partner attempts to strangle you. And people are like, why aren't you saying choking? Choking is the act of something caught in your throat that you're
Mhm.
choking on. Strangulation is when someone is putting their hands on your throat to strangle you. But that is the number one predictor. If that's happening in your relationship, you're at the highest risk for being killed by your abuser. So I just wanted to throw that fact in there so
That's
people
scary.
were aware of that
Hmm.
fact to know.
So, what was the point that you said, okay, I've had enough. I can't take this. Me and my boys don't deserve this. When was the day that you decided, I'm done? I can't do this anymore?
So there was a day. It's actually, I won't share too much about the movie, but it was depicted in the movie with the bird,
Mm-hmm.
the scene with the bird that happened in a similar fashion in real life. I attempted to flee the home with my children, and my ex dragged me back into the house by my hair, ordered my children upstairs, and proceeded to beat me. Took my keys, took my phone. I couldn't call for help. The next morning, he made me apologize to him for almost making him kill me. And I still didn't say anything because the next morning, instead of, I'm so sorry, I'm going to change, it was, if you tell anyone or if you leave me, I'm going to hunt you down like a dog. I'm going to shoot you. I will paralyze you. Any um, heinous threat that he could make, he made, and I believed him. And so it took me 4 months of being like paralyzed in fear. And there was one evening in particular, and I was going to work every day. I was picking the kids up from daycare. I was acting like
Doing what you have to
doing
do.
what I had to do to survive, putting on this front like I wasn't being terrorized at home every single day, like so many victims do. Um, but I was laying in bed and I could hear him get home from work and start to escalate. And I was thinking, how do I get to the gun before him this time so he doesn't kill me? And I realized in that moment that if I didn't leave this relationship, it was going to end in him killing me or me killing him in self-defense. And I didn't want that for my children because I knew they would be raised without either of us, more than likely, with either scenario. So I finally reached out and told my mom what was happening and started creating a safety plan and getting those steps together to leave that relationship and get a personal protection order in place. But it took me, even after that most awful episode of abuse, it took me 4 months before I told anyone because I was living in that with that level of fear.
And probably in shock that they even have, I mean, that all of that happened,
Yeah.
and then it led up to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so many victims go through that, and there's no perfect moment to leave ever. But, you know, once you're ready, you will know you're ready. And that's when it's time to make that move and get yourself out before you end up losing your life or your children become a statistic.
Absolutely. So, what are some things that someone that's going through domestic abuse or domestic violence at home, what are some things that they can do to, I know, to reach out, to find support groups, but what would you say as a survivor? What can they do?
Yeah, so I think one of the most critical things you can do is create a safety plan for yourself, and if you have children, involve them in that safety plan. And what that can look like is basically having a to-go bag ready with important personal belongings and documents. That was one thing that I learned early on when I was doing research from work, when I started to plan to leave my abuser, was to make copies of marriage licenses, birth certificates, social security information, credit information, bank accounts, because once you leave, the chance that you'll ever get a hold of that information is very low. So having it in a spot where your abuser is not going to find it. Also, I recommend having a phone hidden somewhere that you can easily reach, because the first thing abusers do is they take your keys and your phone so that you can't reach out for help. I've had a lot of victims with safety plans actually hide keys as well, under rocks, under doormats, so that they have an extra set of their car keys so that they can get out without their abuser knowing. It's also critical to have a safe place identified, especially if you have children, where you're going to meet up, so that if the violence escalates and you are able to leave the house, that you know where you're meeting your children. Another thing is, if you cannot leave the house, some things to do are to get into a room that you can lock the door and that hopefully has window access that you can actually leave. It's important, as crazy as this sounds, but not to have on necklaces or scarves, because those are things that can be used to choke and strangle you by your abuser. So in the safety planning process, I learned not to wear any of those things before I left my abuser, because they can be used to kill you, essentially.
That's scary to even think about. So what, you could have just been a statistic. You could have just been an abuse survivor and gone on with your life and never done anything like this. So what made you go from being a survivor to an advocate? What was that decision like?
Yeah, I think for me, the decision was made when I saw how many victims were not being heard. They were not being listened to. When I see that the shelter is constantly full, there's no place for victims to go in our state, there's no relocation funding, I realized that a lot of victims cannot speak up. And when it got to the point where my ex was finally incarcerated, I was able to do that because I felt safer knowing he was behind bars. That was before he started trying to hire people to kill me. But knowing so many victims cannot use their voice, I almost felt an obligation and responsibility to become the voice for people who aren't able to do that themselves.
And it's very brave for you to do something like that, because you know, he gets out in a couple years, and what is that thought process for you? You know, you're doing this now, but in a few years you're going to have to go into hiding because he's coming out. So what is that thought process for you, having to go through all that?
I'm angry. about it. I don't think it's fair that victims are the ones to have to change their identities, to lose everything they've built, if they change their social security number, lose their education, um, lose their jobs, their resume, their social security, or choose to leave the country, because those are basically what options are given to victims in severe cases like this. Also, people would often say to me, well, why don't you just go into witness relocation? Well, that's not a thing for victims of domestic violence. That's a thing for people in federal cases like MAP cases or financial fraud cases. It's not a reality for victims of domestic violence. In fact, you're lucky if you live in a state where you get $1,000 to relocate. Otherwise, you're on your own.
So you need to rely on family and friends and the community to help out. And so when you first came out as an advocate and you were wanting the police to help out and any kind of services, where would you find, other than reaching out to the police officers and the legal system, it's not really on the side of victims so much, where would you reach out as far as like a support group? What would be the first place that you reached out to?
So I was able to find some amazing support groups through social media, Facebook in particular. I actually connected with other victims, some that you may have met at the premiere, across the country, who have now become actually very good close friends of mine. But having that opportunity to get online when I could get online safely and connect with other survivors and victims who are going through the same thing as you for the first time it's empowering, but it's like you finally feel like this burden lifted, like there's other people who are going through this. There are people who get me, because for a long time I felt like no one else understood what I was going through. So having that understanding from a peer group was incredibly powerful, and still having that is, we get each other through, because a lot of this stuff never stops or goes away.
And I know Facebook groups, things like that, you can post anonymously.
Yes.
So thank goodness for that feature.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of people, I'm sure, they don't want their name out there because they're afraid their spouse is going to see it, and then they're going to have to reap the repercussions.
I had a false identity on Facebook for a very long time. It was Nick Balaji. I can laugh about it now because it's so cheesy, but like that, so it sounded like it was a man. My profile picture was very gender neutral because I was trying to make sure that my abuser or his friends or family members didn't recognize me on Facebook.
So tell me about the movie Finding Nicole, how that began. You wrote the book. How did that process start when you found out it was going to be turned into a movie?
Yeah, so I'm going to take just a step back to why I wrote the book, if that's okay. I was doing a lot of legislative work, or trying to do a lot of legislative work in the state of Michigan, and felt like we kept running against brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. We finally did get the address confidentiality bill passed, which protects victims' identity when they're moving. That took 7 years, and I testified in front of Senate 3 times before that bill passed. I was working in Washtenaw County on getting the lethality assessments passed for law enforcement, so that whenever they responded to a domestic violence call, they would do the 13-question lethality assessment to assess risk for homicide for victims. And I remember sitting at meeting after meeting, and things were not moving forward, and I was just like, what can I do? Because I was getting frustrated, I was getting angry, and I decided the one thing that I could do that was in my control and power to help people the fastest and the most was to write a book. So my book, it is my memoir, but the back section of the book is actually a guidebook. So it's a survival guidebook for victims, anyone going through domestic violence. It's got everything from the red flags, so people can recognize the red flags, to why victims stay, to help them understand, because when we leave, we carry so much guilt and shame. And so I wanted people to have an understanding of all the different reasons they might stay, including the neurochemical changes that happen when you're cycling through an abusive relationship, and how to document for the police, how to prepare for court. Like I wrote that section of the book in a way that I wished I had someone talking to me through the process, because I had to learn the hard way on so many things. So that's the reason I wrote the book. And Inside Evil with Chris Como did a full episode, and they followed me through the court process. That was a really hard decision to make when they reached out to me, because I was like, what's this going to be like? I'm going to be going through court. But it was probably one of the best decisions I made as an advocate for people to be able to see what victims go through. It's called Until Death Do Us Part. If anyone wants to check that out, it's on my YouTube page. And after that, Netflix reached out to me for their show I Am a Stalker. And in order to be on that show, my ex-husband would have had to agree. And of course, he's not going to agree to be on that show. And I was telling my friend, who was an attorney, Bill DeBraff, who's actually a friend of Darius, that's how we connected, about that. And he said, you know what, I want to introduce you to my friend and client, Harley Wallen. He's a producer here in Michigan. And I'm just like, whatever, people talk, things don't happen. And then within 2 days, Harley reached out to me. By that weekend, we were sitting down in a coffee shop with all of my court records spread over like 4 tables. And from there, just things move forward. And unfortunately, Bill passed away about 6 months ago, so he never got to see the movie come to fruition, but he was a huge part of making the movie happen.
And Harley's wife plays Katie, or Katie plays you in the movie.
Yes, she does.
Yes. So how was that process to actually? It must have been hard to write the book because you're reliving it, but being in theater, and you guys are touring the premieres all over the country, but having to relive that, how has that process been like, all the triggers and everything?
Yeah, so I would say, just like with speaking about your story, the more you do it, the less triggering it becomes. So I've definitely found the more I've seen it and then been able to talk about it in process, the less triggering it's become for me. And I do warn victims that this movie can be triggering, because a lot of the things that you'll see are things that very likely you've gone through with your own abuser, because there tends to be patterns, right, in tactics that abusers use. So I've had so many victims reach out to me though and say, thank you for telling this in a way that's real. And it's not a Cinderella story where like someone swoops in and just saves the day and we go riding off into the sunset. It shows, what's really happening behind closed doors, what the police see when they come to the door, the act that's put on, the mask that's put on by the abuser, and the lack of help and assistance that I get. And that's what so many victims face. So they're so grateful that we did tell the story in a much more realistic way than most domestic violence related movies.
So how can the average person, our viewers, how can they help support abuse survivors? What can they do if they see somebody that is going through it? What steps can they take to help?
Yeah, so I guess number one, if you see it happening out in the community, if you feel safe enough and comfortable enough to ask the victim if they need help, please do that. If you don't, please call 911 and get recording on your phone if possible. I had an incident at Whitaker Road McDonald's where my ex-husband was actually trying to pull me out of my vehicle during a custody exchange. And no one stopped to help me. There were people walking by. No one called the police for me. When I did call the police, he was long gone. And of course, McDonald's couldn't retrieve the video evidence, but had somebody else called the police, had somebody else videoed, I would have had evidence for court that maybe could have helped me. And just imagine if he had gotten me out of my vehicle and into his, and no one had stepped up or videoed or done anything, he could have killed me, and there would be no evidence of what happened to me.
It's amazing that you have survived all of this and you're still fighting to help other people get through it, and you didn't have to do any of this. So thank you for sharing your story. Where can people find the movie?
So it is streaming on a lot of North American platforms, Prime, Apple TV, Fandango, Sling, DirecTV, YouTube. I'm sure Xfinity. I'm sure I'm missing a few. But yes, please stream it, watch it, review it if you can. The reviews are so helpful in getting the movie pushed forward and to get more viewers for it.
And if you're watching or you know of anyone that needs help and is going through domestic abuse, please look at the bottom of the screen on the podcast. We're going to put links to the domestic violence hotline and also check out Nicole's story. Thank you so much for coming in
Thank
today.
you so much.